Okay, so let me write down the metric that we arrived at last time. We had okay, so today we will study what we know about this metric, in particular this parameter A. K is a number which can be either 0 or plus minus 1. Now the first thing that we know about the metric that describes our universe is that it's almost flat, right? Because eta mu nu is a good description of our metric for most practical purposes. So this metric, okay, we must have this parameter A of t and this K must be such that this metric is almost flat. Okay, so let's see what that implies. So let's suppose t naught is a present time. And so now what we can do is we can write the metric as follows. And let's define also A naught just as A of A naught. So this is minus dt square plus A of t over A naught whole square, A naught square just multiplied and divided by A naught. Now we want to bring this metric to a form where it looks like eta mu. Now this one is almost 1 today, right? If t is equal to t naught, then of course it is equal to 1, right? So this is, you can think of it at least today it's 1. So somehow we have to bring it, this part, close to the flat Euclidean metric. Okay, because then this will be almost eta mu. So this can be done by defining A naught R as our rho. Okay, suppose you define A naught R as our rho, then this metric can be written as minus dt square plus A of t over A naught whole square d rho square. Okay, so I am writing everything in terms of rho. Okay. So A naught R is rho, so this becomes 0 square, but this now becomes 1 minus d rho square over A naught square plus rho square times d theta square plus sin square theta d phi square. Okay. So now we see that if we want to make this look like a Euclidean metric, one way to do that will be to take, okay, either k is equal to 0, okay, that's one possibility, but if k is not 0, okay, if k is 1 or minus 1, then we can still make it look like Euclidean metric by taking A naught to be very, very large. Right? Because if A naught is very, very large, then this is like almost 1. So d rho square plus rho square d theta square plus sin square theta d phi square is just the flat Euclidean metric but written in polar coordinates. So if we want nearly flat metric,
But what about 80 by A naught?
Yes, I am coming to that. So we first of all need A naught to be very, very large. Well, or let me write A naught large. A naught large compared to the length scale that we are familiar with. And AT over A naught of course is 1 today, okay, by construction, because A naught is A of T naught. Okay. But you have to make sure that this remains 1 for a reasonable amount of time, right? Because if we don't want the metric to be flat just today, okay, but metric will still remain flat 1 year from now or 1 year earlier, right? So we need A of T over A naught over A naught to be a slowly varying function.
So this is at least for now. I mean, at the present.
Yes, exactly. So at present, okay, very early in the universe or very late in the universe, you don't know what will happen. Right? That for that you have to extrapolate, okay, which we will try to do later. But at least today we know that A naught should be very large, unless k is 0, in which case A naught actually is not a relevant constant, because you can just, if k is 0, right, then this is flat metric, right? So the overall scale can simply be absorbed in a redefinition of the coordinates. Right? Because rescale the xyz coordinate, that can change the overall scale of A. Right? The overall scale of A is not relevant, not a physical parameter if k is 0, but if k is not 0, it is a physical parameter. It does affect the metric. But if we want our space-time metric to look like eta mu nu, not just at one instant of time, but over a reasonable amount, reasonable period, that we over at least a historical time scale, then we need these two conditions. The A naught should be large and this should be slowly varying. Is this point clear?
Slowly varying means
Slowly varying, okay, that of course will be determined by experiment, right? It's slowly varying in the sense that the metric inside this room shouldn't change 1 year from now, right? It will still look like eta mu nu.
I'm saying that time scale should be of the order of some.
Yeah, so it depends on your experimental bound, right? We observe over a certain time scale, and over that time scale it should remain slowly varying.
So this requirement still holds when k is 0, right?
Yes, so even on k is 0, so this requirement still holds, only this requirement doesn't, this is not needed because overall constant in A naught is irrelevant, right? You can always absorb it into the rescaling of the xyz coordinate. Is this point clear? Of course, how slowly it varies, as I said, it will depend on experiment, right? Or how large A naught should be, that also depends on experiment. Now today, as far as we know, A naught could be infinity or that. There is no evidence so far of this being non-zero in any physical experiment. Okay. So that can lead us to two conclusions. One is that A naught is infinity, or that k is 0. So in today, from whatever experiments we have today, there is no way to see whether this is different from 0 or not, this combination. Which basically means one of two things, either k is 0 or A naught equal to is very large. Right? A naught equal to infinity is equivalent to setting k equal to 0. Okay? But today, of course, we cannot say that this is actually 0 because the experiment can only put bounds. Okay? And the bound that we know from today's experiment is that this could be 0. Right? There is no evidence for any non-zero value of this in any experiment. There is an upper bound.
There is upper bound.
Yeah, there is an upper bound from experiments, right, which we will discuss in a slightly different language. Yes, so there is an upper bound on this, right, but there is no lower bound. It could be 0. Is this clear? Okay. Now let's see what will be the consequence of a metric of this kind. Okay, we wrote down this metric, so what are the consequences? So the particular consequence that we will be studying involves the following question: that imagine that we are sitting here today, okay, and you are observing a star, okay, which is far away. Okay. What difference will it make if the metric is like this from if the metric had been just flattening across the space time? Yeah, because you want to see if A is constant, right? Or if A is constant and K is 0, then that is like flat Minkowski space, right? So you want to make sure that you are not actually living in flat Minkowski space, right? How will you know? So one way you know, as we will see, is by observing distant stars. Okay? So let's suppose that we are sitting here and you observe a distant star. We want to see whether from that observation we can get any idea about what A of t is. Is this question clear? Okay, so you want to see how light travels from distant star to us. Okay. So you have a source A and an observer B. Okay, so this is our source. Okay, this is our observer, which is of course us. And we want to study the motion, the propagation of light from A to B. Okay. So you have to find first of all a null geodesic that connects A to B. Okay, because light travels along geodesics and it's also null. Now to do this, it will be useful to choose A and B at convenient positions in this coordinate system. Okay, and we can do that because this universe, as we have written, is homogeneous and isotropic. Okay, so it doesn't matter where you are. Right? The physics will be the same. Okay. Similarly, it doesn't matter in which direction you look, the physics will be the same. Okay. A star from one direction will have exactly the same effect as a star from another direction because of isotropy. So we will make a choice that we are sitting at the origin r equal to 0. Okay, and so some value of theta and phi, which you can take to be theta and phi to be 0. If r is 0, then theta and phi doesn't matter. Okay, because it's like the tip of the cone. You can see this is like the origin of the coordinate system. Okay. So take the position of P to be r equal to 0, theta equal to 0, phi equal to 0. Now all that matters for A, where you take A, is the distance of A from us. Okay, if A we look in one direction, okay, then A can be a certain distance away, but other than that, the direction doesn't matter. Okay. So we will take A to be at r equal to r naught, theta equal to 0, phi equal to 0. Okay, r naught will essentially give how far it is from us. Okay, if r naught is 0, then of course A is on us. Okay, so r naught measures how far it is away from us. Theta and phi, okay, in principle would have given the angle at which this object is, but we don't care because we should get the same answer irrespective of which direction you are in. So now we have to find a geodesic just connects B to A. Right? A geodesic that passes through B to B and A, okay, because that's the geodesic along which light will travel. Okay, in fact, we have to find null geodesic. So we take an null geodesic. Okay, so the equation is d2 x mu d2 square plus mu rho. Okay, and if it's null, then you also want ds square to be 0 along the geodesic. dx mu, sorry, mu rho. Now, of course, for this we can easily calculate the Christoffel symbols, and I'll leave it as an exercise to check that theta equal to 0, phi equal to 0, x naught equal to some function of u, and r t equal to some function of u, r equal to some function of u, solves the equation. So basically what we need to show is that if we set theta and phi to be 0, then these are identically 0. Right? d2 theta and du square and d2 phi du square are identically 0. We have to make sure that these terms are also identically 0. Okay? When we set theta and phi to be 0. Okay? So basically these terms will involve d theta du or d phi du, and hence as a result they will just vanish because you have set theta and phi to be 0. And then the other two equations for x naught and r will give some differential equation for f and g, okay, which you can write down. Okay, and the solution to those differential equations will be the geodesic. Okay, but we will not need to actually solve the differential equation. Okay, as we will see. We will check that for mu, x mu equal to theta and x mu equal to phi, this is identically 0. Okay, for 0 and r, you just write down the differential equation. Okay, but now once we accept this, we see that ds square now has a simple formula, that is minus dt square plus dr square over 1 minus kr square.
The 8.
Sorry, a times a of t. So this tells us that dt over a of t is plus minus dr over square root of 1 minus kr square. Okay, so you really don't have to solve the equation. If you want these as functions of u, okay, you have to solve this equation, but this equation tells us how t changes as a function of r. Okay? That's the physical information. Now the sign that you have to pick here is a minus sign. Okay, why? Because when t increases, okay, in the way we have set it up, when t increases, r is decreasing, right? Because we are at r equal to 0. We are at r equal to 0. Okay, that is b, and the source is at r equal to r naught. So obviously the source had emitted time earlier. Right? I emitted the radiation earlier. That's traveling to us. Okay. So we receive the light at a later time, but the source is actually at larger value of r. Okay. So that basically means you have to put minus sign here. And by integrating we get the following equation. So integral t1 to t0 dt over d of t is integral 0 to r0 dr. So the minus sign I have basically used to exchange the limits. Okay, otherwise it should have been r0 to 0, I have made it from 0 to r0.
Sir, 2
Yes.
points. This null geodesics, keep theta and phi constant, is it a manifestation of the symmetry?
Yeah, it's basically a manifestation of a spherical symmetry. Right? From a spherical symmetry, I mean intuitively we can see, right? If you are on the sphere, right? If we fix the theta and phi on the two ends, it moves along the same constant value of theta and phi, constant value of phi. Right? In this case, it also is a constant value of theta because it's actually a spherical polar coordinate that you are thinking of.
So
Right?
because you can say that if it moves in certain theta is changing, then it chooses a certain direction, and it will violate the isotropy.
If theta, yeah, I mean the point is if k is 0, then it's even clearer. Right? If k equal to 0, then it's flat Euclidean space. Okay. If you are at the origin, okay, and if you send light from some angle, some point, right, it will travel along the straight line towards us. Right. That's the intuition. okay, and along a straight line to the origin, theta and phi remains constant. Right? That's the intuition we are using. Okay, but you can see it by solving this equation. Is this clear? Right? So basically, if k is 0, then it's flat Euclidean space, and all you are saying is that if you are sitting at the origin, okay, then light should travel along a straight line from any point towards us, okay, irrespective of the fact that the universe is expanding or contracting, okay, irrespective of the fact of A of t. That doesn't destroy the spherical symmetry. Okay, but the same intuition goes through also for non-zero k. Okay, because symmetry is the same, right? The rotational symmetry, okay, whether k is 0 or non-zero is the same, because that depends on this part of the metric. Okay, this is invariant rotation. Rotation doesn't affect R anymore. Okay, so is this clear? Right? So what does this tell us? This tells us, this in a sense, that if we know R naught, right? If we know how far the star is, okay, it tells us when the light originated from that star. If you know A of t, you can solve this equation to find t1. Okay, how long ago light started traveling from that star? Now suppose that instead of observing one signal, we observe two signals from the same object at a certain time interval. Okay, then we receive some signal at time t0, then we wait for a time delta t0, and then we look at another signal from the same star. Okay. So that I will call t0 plus delta t0. Okay. So this is observation time, and the emission time we will call t1 plus delta t1. Okay, this is the emission time. So the same equation will hold, right? Because the star is not changing its position. Okay, in our coordinate we are thinking of the star as being at rest. So t1 will change to t1 plus delta t1, and t0 will change to t0 plus delta t0. So t1 plus delta t1 to t0 plus delta t0 dt over dt will be integral 0 to r naught dr over square of 1 plus 0. Okay, note the right hand side hasn't changed. So now what we are going to do is to subtract this from this. Okay, if you subtract this from this, okay, the contribution comes from the two ends, right? Because in the bulk it's the same integral. Okay. The contribution comes because here the integration starts a little late, okay, and the integration also continues a little late. Okay. So subtracting we will get delta t0 over A of t0 minus delta t1 over A of t1.
And that delta T1 and delta T0 may be different, and we are taking into different.
Yes.
Reflected, because even though there is a general time, its evolution is not uniform throughout the universe.
No, its evolution is uniform, right? But we are not. The point is what you are doing here, right? Is that see, we have no choice. We sit here and we observe the star, right? We cannot choose to decide on what time we observe the star, what time the star would have emitted light, right? If we receive the light today at t0, the star would have emitted light at some time earlier, then determined by the evolution of the universe, right?
What I am saying is that if we are talking about the general time,
Yes.
then 1 hour in one point, maybe the should be 1 hour in some other point. If we are talking about the general
At the same time, but the point is we are not being able to fix the sign, right? 1 hour here, right, may look like 1 hour here, but provided you compare this at the same time slice, same value of t, right, same value of cosmic time. But that's not we are not able to do that, right? When you go far away, when you look at objects far away, right, we look at a star that was far in the past, right? If we observe something today, right, and then if 1000 years later, okay, somebody observes something which took 1000 years to come, then you will see the same physics, okay, because then you are comparing the physics here today, okay, with physics here today, right? Because the physics here today will be observable to us 1000 years later. Is this point clear? Right? So that is a statement of homogeneity, right? That at the same time the universe looks homogeneous everywhere, okay? But not that the universe here today, okay, will look like the universe somewhere else, okay, in the past. Yeah? That's what we are taking into account here. Is this point clear? So this follows as was subtracting these two.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Isn't T the cosmic time, which is not dependent on the observer but dependent on the universe itself?
Exactly. Yes.
But then you're saying that when it was emitted,
Yes.
at that time the time difference observed was different from when it was observed at a later time. So
That's
that
right.
means the time difference in terms of cosmic time
Yes.
has actually changed. So
Yes. But the point is the cosmic time in this case is also the proper time, because we have assumed that both the source and observer are sitting at fixed r, right? R theta phi.
Okay.
So ds square is really minus dt square. Right?
Mm.
So yes, we are doing this calculation of the cosmic time, but it also the proper time of the observer and the source.
Okay. So, okay, so the changes are in terms of the proper times of observer.
Yes, so you can, we did the calculation for the cosmic time, but this is the same as the proper time. We are taking the observer and the source to be at rest in this cosmic frame.
So this time difference will be different because by the time light reaches us,
Yes.
the metric has changed at least up to 8 square.
Yeah, because the metric is time dependent, exactly.
Like the exponent of
Okay. But the point is the fact that it will change, this is just simple mathematics, right? You can try to interpret it, but I mean there should be no doubt that this equation is correct, right? Okay, we can try to interpret it in various ways, right? And we will see various ways of interpreting this. But so this tells us that delta T1 and delta T0 are different in general. Okay, if the object is really far away, right? If the object is close by, then T1 may be different from T0, but it's not very different, right? And in that case, because A of T is slowly varying, we will not see any effect. Okay, so we really have to look at far away objects, but the change in A of T is appreciable. So now, so far you have been talking about two signals, but now suppose that this period that you are examining is not the period between two different signals, but it is the period between the peaks and the two successive peaks of an electromagnetic wave that we are receiving. Okay, that's a particularly good viewpoint, and the same formula will hold there. If it's different than two successive peaks of an electromagnetic wave. In this case, delta T naught will be 1 over nu naught, right? The frequency of the electromagnetic wave. And delta T1 will be 1 over nu 1. So this tells us that nu naught, so you have to bring it in the numerator, right? So nu naught is A of T1 over A of T naught times nu 1. Nu naught is what you are observing, nu 1 is what was emitted. Is this clear? And as I already said, this was a frequency in the cosmic time t, but this is also a proper frequency. Okay, this is the proper frequency of the what was emitted, and this is the proper frequency that we are seeing today. So then we see that by looking at far away objects and seeing how the frequencies of emission of light from those objects compare with expected result, we can figure out what E of t is doing.
Yeah.
Okay. And the general observation is that light from distant sources are red shifted. Okay. Now what it means is that you have a certain spectral lines, right? There are specific spectral lines with definite frequencies, right, which you are all familiar with. It's a sodium line. Okay. Every star has some specific emission lines, right? Because there are various elements in the star. Okay. So those frequencies we are familiar with, how does the pattern. Okay. And if we find that as a whole, okay, the frequency has gotten shifted, okay, that means that there is an overall scaling of the frequency and not that individual lines for some reason, right, maybe we are misidentifying individual lines. Okay. So that's what is found. Okay. So when I say that frequency has been is red shifted, what we find is that the spectrum of distant stars is red shifted compared to spectrum that you are familiar with in the laboratory. Is this clear? Okay. Which means nu naught is less than nu 1. The nu naught is what we are observing, nu 1 is what was emitted. Okay. If nu naught is less than nu 1, that means A of T1 is less than A of T naught. Okay. So universe at early time had a smaller scale factor than the universe at later time, so the universe is expanding.
It's red shifted. The light has been red shifted.
Because you compare the spectrum from distant stars. Right? Take a star far away.
To compare it with what?
With the known spectral lines. Right? Imagine that the sodium, right? Take sodium line. Right?
Okay.
These are very distinct signature.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The double. Now if you find that those double line gets shifted, right? With ratios remaining fixed.
So you've identified sodium, but you say that it's redshifted, but how do you know that it's...
That is sodium, yeah. Because the relative spacing is not changed, right? So to identify that is sodium, so you don't look at just one line, right? One line will not tell you whether it's sodium or calcium or whatever, right? But if you have the whole spectrum of lines,
okay, so you compare the whole spectrum.
Yeah, you compare the whole spectrum with the known spectrum, right? And if you find that the ratios are fixed, but you can just fit the spectrum with known spectrum by an overall scaling, right? Then you know that means that the light it has been redshifted, right? Single spectrum, of course, you cannot compare, right? Because you don't know a single line where single ray of light was.
You don't know what the source of
emission is, right? But if you know multiple lines, right, then you can easily figure out, okay, what is representing what, right? And that's what you do in these redshift analysis.
So delta nu by nu is independent of nu basically.
Yes, exactly. Delta nu by nu is independent of nu. Yeah, because everything gets scaled by the same factor.
Sir, as a consequence of this, we are saying that the universe is expanding.
Yeah, because A of T1 is less than A of T
Suppose
naught.
if the universe is not expanding, then what would be the form of this relation between?
Then it will be nu naught will be equal to nu 1. If A of T1 is equal to A of T naught, then nu naught and nu 1 are the same.
So there will be no such factor
Redshift.
like A of T.
No, there will be factor of A of T, but it's the same factor.
Constant.
Right? See, expanding means that A of T1
So
and A of T naught are different, right?
So at every point, at every cosmic time,
Yes.
A of T will be same. So this is a constant function.
Yes, exactly.
Just a constant.
If it's just a constant, then that means it's not an expanding universe. Right? So if A of T is just a constant, then there's no time dependence in the metric.
Then that constant will be some fixed value.
That constant could be some fixed value, or it could be 0. Or it could be, yeah, it could be fixed value, exactly. Right? If k is 0, then that constant can be, of course, be absorbed into the rescaling of these. Right? But otherwise, that constant could be some fixed value, yes. I know that's not what you observe, right? You observe that the universe is expanding. Okay? So A of T is increasing. Okay? Because A of T1 is less than A of T naught. Right? T1 was in the past, right? Which means the scale factor in the past was smaller than the scale factor today.
So, but how do you ensure that this is not a result of some basic background metric like which you have a shift because of the metric was not flat?
Because the metric was.
Not flat. Like we have done gravitational.
Yeah, okay. So the point is that you have to do it for many stars, right? For one star, right, overall redshift could be because of the gravitational potential. Right? But if you examine it over many stars, right, of different masses and sizes and so on. And then if you find that this pattern holds, right, then you know that it's it's an overall effect, right? I mean, it's also, for example, this could be Doppler shift, right?
Yes.
Imagine that the other star is just moving away from us, okay, just because it has some peculiar velocity, right? Some other star will be coming towards us, some other star will be moving away from us, but those will average out if you observe many stars, okay? So if after averaging over many stars, right, you find this effect surviving, right, then you know that as a overall the distance between us and the stars are increasing, right? And that's how you conclude that the universe is expanding.
So there is no star which is at rest, which that is kind of assumption.
There is no star which is at rest.
With respect to your whole that background material.
Yeah, so the stars overall, so the assumption is that the overall the stars are at rest
At rest
with respect to the background metric, right? And we will see that this is necessary because otherwise it's so inconsistent with the form of the background metric. So for the background metric we have assumed some kind of homogeneity and isotropy, right? So the source also and the average should have the same property, right? If all the stars are moving in some particular direction with respect to that background, then the source itself will not have the correct symmetry, right? So Einstein's equations will be inconsistent.
So it can move in randomly.
Yes, it can move randomly, exactly, right? So that the average velocity is 0, right? So what you observe here is that, of course, if you for nearby stars, right, the local Doppler effect can overcome this effect, okay? But that's why you have to average over many nearby stars, right? Some may be moving towards us, some may be moving away from us, okay? And then you average, and if you still find that this effect persists, then we conclude that the universe is expanding. If you go far away, right, then this effect is large. Okay. Then local Doppler effects, okay, are less relevant. Okay, because local velocities are fixed, right? Whereas this effect becomes larger and larger as you go to further and further in the past. Okay, because the A of t, the smaller you are this, the smaller was the universe. Is this clear?
Those are hard to observe.
Yeah, far away objects are of course hard to observe.
So that's
Well, the point is more than being hard to observe, right? The main difficulty in this is to estimate the distance, right? Suppose you see a star, right? How do you know how far it is away? How far away it is, right? So people have devised what are called standard candles, right? From that, because I mean you have there are certain objects, right, for which you have a good idea about the luminosity, okay, how luminous it is from theoretical calculations, right? And then by seeing how it looks to us, right, how luminous it looks to us, you can estimate the distance, because the intensity will fall off as 1 over r square. So that's one of the ways you figure out the distances of distance objects, and that's what goes in actually studying this effect. So let me give now some definitions. So A of t over A of t naught, okay, t naught is today. We have already said that it's a slowly varying function of t. Okay. So it makes sense to make a Taylor series expansion of this in powers of t minus t naught. Okay. So the first term in the Taylor series expansion of course is 1. The coefficient of the second term is what we call the Hubble constant. So this is the current expansion rate.
Linear.
pardon. So by definition, this is the first term in the Taylor series expansion, right? Because if you take ddt of this is the what is called contribute. Okay, let me write the rest of the terms. Second term you parameterize by Q naught H naught square T minus T naught square. So this H naught square is just a convenient normalization. Q naught is the new parameter which tells us the second derivative. Okay, and then there are higher order terms. So this, what does it measure?
Acceleration of the
Yeah, this measures in fact deceleration because of the minus sign.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah, it's conventionally defined with a minus sign. So this is what is known as a deceleration parameter. And the reason that it was introduced with this sign is because when this notation was introduced, okay, everybody thought that Q naught is actually positive. Okay? That means the universe is slowing down, the expansion is slowing down. Okay? So this measures how fast the expansion is slowing down. Okay? But now we know that Q naught is actually negative. Okay, this is from observation. So the universe is accelerating.
Still the minus sign.
Well, it was introduced long time ago, right? So you keep the deceleration parameter and you say that it's negative.
Sir, how this Q naught is obtained?
How this Q naught is obtained?
I mean, observe.
Basically, you observe further and further stars, and that way, if you know how this is varying as a function of time.
Because the further we look, that is.
Yeah, the further you look, the more information you have about this function, right?
Okay.
Okay. And from that you figure out Q naught. So the first time Q naught was figured out is what is called the supernova cosmology project, right? So people looked at distant supernovas, okay? And supernovas are used because they are what are called standard candles, okay? That their luminosity function is well known, okay? And as a result, if you know what the actual luminosity, how bright they are, you can estimate the distance very well. Okay? So that gives you information about the distance, okay? And then you look at the redshift and you compare, okay, to find what this function is. Okay, and then you can work backwards and you can calculate this Q naught.
So there may be some other sources which will be contributing to the luminosity of that supernova.
Yes, of course, because dust, for example, right? I mean,
So that-
see, the theory of supernova is reasonably well understood, so people know the luminosity of the source. But on the way, right, you don't know what is in front of us, right? There will be dust, there will be various kinds of objects which can absorb the radiation. So all those corrections have to be factored in. That is only after factoring in all those corrections that, I mean, that's the reason why it took so many years, right? It was discovered only in the about around 2000. The fact that the universe is accelerating was discovered only around 2000. Okay? And that required taking into account all these effects.
What was the name of the project?
Cosmic.
Yeah, it's called Supernova Cosmology Project, and I think there is another one which is called High Z Supernova projects. Right? Both of these are based on supernova. So two experiments independently, in fact, went on and confirmed this. Now there are other, evidence for this. Okay, from the study of cosmic microwave background. Okay, but the first it was discovered using the supernova. Okay. So another useful quantity is what is called redshift parameter, Z. So Z for any object is A of P naught over A of P1 plus 1. So minus 1. Okay. So it can be used to denote two different things. Okay. One is that Z can be used to tell us about a time. Okay. When it was far in the past, Z was high. Okay. Because today Z is 0, that's how it is defined. Okay. As you go farther and farther in the past, Z is larger and larger. Okay. But most often it is used to describe the location of an object. Then imagine that you have an object at distance. Then you define T1 to be the time at which the light would have been emitted there, okay, so that it reaches us today. Right? The same T1 that you used there. Right? If you are observing some object today, light that we are seeing today, okay, started from a faraway object in the past. Okay? That is your definition of T1. Okay, when did the light originate? You substitute that value of T1 and calculate Z, okay, by this formula. That's what is called a redshift. Okay, so this is directly the redshift of the object. Right? That imagine that you are observing a distance object. Right? What it means is that the frequencies, the spectrum of that object will get scaled by a factor of 1 plus Z. Right? Because 80 not over 81, that is the scale ratio by which the spectrum gets shifted, right? And that by definition is 1 plus Z. Okay. So this is the reason why Z is directly used to measure how to denote how far that object is. Is this clear? Okay. The farther the object is, the larger is the Z. Redshift. Z is called redshift.
Redshift factor.
Where is the parameter?
Yeah. Okay. So now we turn to the question of how to determine A of t theoretically.
So, since 80 is a slowly varying function, so we assume that the other terms in the Taylor expansion are small.
Well, yeah, the point is they are not observed today. Right? I mean, by direct observation, you can only go up to this part. And as I said, this also took many years to actually observe. Right?
Nearly 100.
Yeah, higher terms are not observable today. Well, it took many years not because you have to wait for a long time, right? That would be not gain us too much. Okay? It took many years because you have to improve your apparatus, right? The sensitivity had to be introduced. It's not that if you wait for 100 years and then this will become important, right? That's not the way to determine this. Okay. So if you want to know how A of t changes with time, okay, one of course is the direct observation, right? That's what these measurements give. Okay. But then you want to use that to extrapolate what will happen to our universe far in the future or what was there far in the past, right? That of course direct observation cannot tell us. Okay. But we know that the evolution of a metric is determined by Einstein's equation. Okay, so you have to now make use of Einstein's equation to see how A will change as a function of time, and then try to use this information to fix some of the constants that may appear in the equation. So evolution of A use Einstein's equation. So again, one has to calculate all the components of a Ricci tensor. I will leave it as an exercise to check that R00, okay, so X0 is by definition T, so I could have also written the RTT. This is given by 3 A double dot over A. RI0 is 0. So I stands for r theta phi, the space coordinates. And rij, okay, in fact has a simple form. Okay, it's best written in terms of the metric itself. Okay, k is the same constant that appeared that as 1 minus k r square. Gij is the ij component of the matrix, the space component. Is this okay? Okay, so this is, you can verify by explicit calculation. So you can calculate r from here, g00 r00 plus gij rij. And you basically have to use the fact that gij, g lower ij is 3, right? Because the g upper ij is g inverse. So use the fact that gij, this sum runs over 3 coordinates, so this is 3. And this delta, this is given by minus 6 a double dot over a minus 6 a dot square over a square minus 6 a over a square. Okay, so basically this gives you 3 times this one, and this g naught naught r naught naught gives you another minus 3 over 3. Okay. And now you substitute in the Einstein's equation, right? So r00 minus half r g00. This should be equal to minus 8 pi g d00, right? So this you can easily calculate now. Okay, because you have r00. And this, let me write the result, this is minus 3 a dot square over a square minus 3k over a square. Okay. This 6 becomes 3 because of this half factor. And this gets cancelled against r00, which is here. Then we have ri0 minus half rgi0. This should be equal to minus 8 pi g pi0. This is identically 0. Right, because that's a component I0 component, or I0 is 0, and gi0 is also 0. And finally, minus 8 pi g3ij should be rij minus half rgij, and this you can check is gij times 2a double dot over a dot a actually the dot means time derivative. That's the only variable on which anything can depend on. So when you compare this, okay, we see already that this tells us that T mu nu cannot be arbitrary. Okay. T mu nu must have a restricted form. So in particular, this tells us Ti0 must be 0. Okay. So Ti0 must be 0. T00. Okay, there is no restriction. Okay, we will call rho. So this is the definition. And Tij should be proportional to Gij. Right? The proportionality constant and P. This can of course depend on those. So in other words, if you want a homogeneous and isotropic metric, you cannot have an arbitrary energy momentum tensor. Okay. The energy momentum tensor has to have this specific structure. Okay, rho and P as yet are not fixed by symmetric consideration. Now this you could have actually derived, okay, without going to Einstein's equation. Okay. And the point is that if we are demanding that the universe is homogeneous and isotropic, okay, which means that it has certain isometries under which metric retains its form. Okay. It better be that the source for the metric also retains the same form. That this isometry must be also a symmetry of the source, that means T mu nu. Okay. Unless the matter distribution, okay, has a certain symmetry, there is no way the metric can have that symmetry. Okay. Because matter after all is the source for the metric. So what does it mean by imposing that symmetry on T mu nu? So suppose x mu goes to x prime mu, okay, which is some function of x is an isometry. Okay, isometry as we discussed is a special kind of general coordinate transformation that preserves the form of the metric. Then under this T prime mu nu of x prime, there is just the usual laws for general coordinate transformation. It's given by this is a general transformation form. But now isometry will demand that this should be T mu nu of x prime. The functional form should remain unchanged. Okay, that gives a condition on what kind of T mu nu you can have. Okay? Because not all functions will satisfy this property. And essentially what you can show is that this is the most general structure that has all the isometries which should be there. Okay, we saw that you have isometries corresponding to homogeneity and isotropy. Okay. So given the space time, okay, those must be symmetries of the metric and hence also of the energy momentum tensor. Okay. And that condition basically fixes this form of the metric of the energy momentum tensor. Okay, it's not something that you have to use Einstein's equation to see.
Under these specific isometries corresponding to this metric, this is the corresponding form of the tensor, right?
Exactly, yeah.
If the isometries were different, the form of the tensor.
Yeah, if isometries are different, the form would be different, right? But we fix the form of the isometries by requiring homogeneity and isotropy. These are the criteria, right? We didn't start with the metric first and then studied the isometry. We demanded that it should be homogeneous and isotropic, and we arrived at these three possible form of the metric. Okay. Under the same condition, when you implement on the energy momentum tensor, you will find that this is the most general structure that energy momentum tensor has. Is this clear?
So, if we have a homogeneous and isotropic background, then you can say, or can we argue that the energy momentum tensor should be that of a homogeneous and isotropic fluid?
Well, by definition, I mean you can say this is the definition of homogeneous and isotropic fluid, right? I mean, how do you define a homogeneous and isotropic fluid, right? You take an arbitrary T mu and demand that it has isometries,
Yeah.
right? You get this and you declare that this is the definition of a homogeneous and isotropic fluid. Right? You are not demanding anything more than the isometry of the energy momentum tensor.
It looks like a perfect fluid structure.
Yeah.
Well, okay, perfect fluid has other conditions, but yeah, it's like a perfect fluid. Okay, but you have to also give some constituent relations to specify a fluid that we have not given so far.
Sir,
Yes.
Is this a general statement that isotropy, isometry of the metric will also be the isometry of the energy momentum tensor?
Well, you may have special cases where that is not true, but no, in fact, that has to be true because if the metric has certain isometry, right, then the Riemann tensor will have the same isometries, right? Okay, so from Einstein's equation you can see that the energy momentum tensor has to have the isometry. Okay. The reverse may not be true under certain circumstances. Okay, T mu may not have certain isometries. Okay. The metric may acquire an accidental value. Even that is probably not true because metric and there may be other things, not T mu. Okay, but T mu is produced by other objects, right? The electromagnetic fields. Okay, you may under special circumstances have non-isometric electromagnetic field, which happens to produce a symmetric energy momentum tensor, isometric energy momentum tensor. Right? In principle.
The total energy momentum tensor will contain everything, so for matter and
Yeah, there will be different components, right? Neither of which individually have their isometry, but when you add them together, you have their isometry.
The RHS is the full thing.
Yes, exactly.
So the full thing and the metric share the isometry.
Exactly. But the point is that it is very unnatural to have an isometry of the energy momentum tensor if individual components don't have their isometry. Okay. So far, of course, we have not made any such assumption. Right? We are only talking about total energy momentum tensor. But later on, we will try to write it as a sum of various components, and there will demand that each component has the same isometry. Okay. It is not strictly necessary, but it will be very unnatural to cook up a scenario of that kind, where each component has no isometry, but when you add them together, it suddenly accidentally acquires some isometry. Right? And even if you can achieve it at a given time, right, over time, that isometry may go away. Yes, because different components may evolve differently, and the cancellation may not take place.
So if metric, if your energy momentum.
Well, if the energy momentum tensor is having an isometry, right, the point if the metric doesn't have that isometry, at least the Riemann tensor has to have the isometry.
Yeah.
Right? So now the question is, can you cook up some form of the metric, right, which doesn't have certain isometry, but the Riemann tensor has an isometry? It is possible in principle. Right? For example, even with zero energy momentum tensor, suppose energy momentum tensor was zero.
But sir, metric should also, because G mu also
R can be
Einstein's equation,
R
G
is
mu-
also there, na?
R can be 0 for such a metric.
Yeah. See, let me give an example. Suppose you have no energy momentum tensor, T mu equal to zero, right? In space time. So that has translational symmetry, a rotational symmetry. But you know that that equation has gravitational wave solution,
Yes.
right? Which breaks translational and rotational symmetry, right? The corresponding metric is not isometric. Nevertheless, Riemann tensor is zero, or not Riemann tensor, Ricci tensor is zero for that, right? So that has that isometry. So it is in principle possible that if the source has certain isometry, the metric itself, because it solves second order differential equation, right? The constant of integration may break that isometry. Okay, so let me write down the equations then. So this form of T mu the 0, 0 component gives you A dot over A whole square plus Q over A square equal to 8 pi Q over 3 times I0 component, of course, is trivial, it gives 0 equal to 0. And Ij component gives you really one equation because both sides are proportional to Gij. So this equation is 2A double dot over A Now, so far we have not said anything about rho and p. Okay, so let's imagine that we treat them as independent variables. Okay, independent unknown functions of time. If we take that point of view, then we can see that we don't have enough number of equations to determine all of them. Why? Because we have really two differential equations. This is the first order equation, this is the second order equation. Right? We have two differential equations but three unknowns. Right? Rho, P and A. K of course is constant, that's 1 or plus minus 1 or 0, and you can solve them separately. K is not an integration variable. That
We cannot predict K.
Well, as you will see that we can predict that K is either 0 or A naught is very large. In which case it is indistinguishable from K being 0. Okay. So with the data we have, we cannot determine solutions to these equations, even after supplying integration constants. Right? We of course always need integration constants because these are differential equations. Okay? But we simply don't have enough differential equations to solve for three variables. Now this of course is not a fundamental problem, okay? Because after all rho and P are not independent dynamical variables, right? Rho and P are components of the energy momentum tensor, right? Energy momentum tensor by itself is not an independent dynamical variable. Energy momentum tensor is produced by something, right? So for example, suppose the rho is produced by rho and P, and this energy momentum tensor is produced by particles moving around. In which case we know that P mu nu, which means both rho and P, is given in terms of x mu of tau. Okay. So the independent variables there really are A of P, which is the degree of freedom metric, and the particles which are moving around. There we will have certainly sufficient number of equations to solve this problem. Okay? Because x mu will have its own equation of motion, right, which you can use to solve the differential equations. Or, for example, you could have a T mu nu for electromagnetic fields. Okay, imagine that the energy momentum tensor is produced by electromagnetic field in the universe. Then you can think of the electromagnetic fields as our independent variables, okay, the E and B or F mu nu or A mu, okay, the vector potential. Then P mu nu is given in terms of the vector potential, right? Because after all we have written down the expression for T in terms of F mu nu, right? And then you have separate equations which govern the dynamics of the vector potential, right? The Maxwell's equations. It's not that fundamentally there is an issue here, because you will always have enough equations to solve the problem if you knew the source explicitly. nevertheless, in these kinds of problems, it's useful to try to simplify it by not looking at details of what kind of source is producing it. Okay. So you have to use information from the source, okay, but not look at the details and start solving the equations of motion for the source. Okay. But the way we use the information about the source, okay, is by trying to work out some relationship between the rho and p that the source produces. Okay. So if you have a certain kind of relation between rho and p, okay, which comes from the underlying source, okay, but once you have a relation between rho and p which you get from there, then you can forget about the source and use that relationship between rho and p as the third equation. Okay. Imagine that we knew the functional relationship between rho and p. Okay. Then you are done, right? Because then you could write p as a function of rho. So you have two equations in two variables. Okay. One equation is that of A, the other is for, this you can convert now as an equation for rho. Okay. And you can solve the corresponding differential equation. Okay. So this relationship between rho and p, rho p relation, is what is known as the equation of state. But I should have said this before, but we will do it later. Rho, of course, has a very clear interpretation. This is the energy density. Right? P is what is commonly called a pressure. Okay. Now, why is it the pressure that you are familiar with in normal life? Okay, we'll try to discuss maybe next time. Okay, but P is what is called pressure. But what I was trying to say here is that if we know the relationship between rho and P, okay, from whatever, okay, from knowing some details about the source, but not every detail, okay, then we could use that to solve this equation without worrying about the details of the source.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, before we go on to discuss equation of state, let me try to rewrite the equations in a slightly more convenient form. So, given this equation, so this is going to be one of the important equations, okay, which we are going to use. Okay. This is normally called the Friedmann equation. Okay. This is going to be important. This equation we are going to manipulate to make it into something else. One of the reasons being that it's a second derivative, right? Equations with two derivatives are always harder to deal with than equations with single derivative. So this is good. This is we are going to manipulate. So let's consider d dt of rho a cube. Now rho you can calculate from here. So rho a cube. So this is 3 over 8 pi g d dt. So we have to multiply by a cube. So this is a dot square times a plus k. So this is 3 over 8 pi g. Let's take the derivative. So this gives you 2 a double dot a dot a plus a dot cube, okay, when the dt acts on this, plus k a dot. And write this as 3 over 8 pi g times a dot times a square, a dot times a square, 2 a double dot a plus a dot square over a square plus k over a square. And now we can use the second equation to write this. as minus 8 pi g as t. So when you combine this, this becomes minus 3p a naught a square. dt rho cq plus 3p. So basically what you have done here is that you have gotten rid of the two derivative term. Okay, of course it's hidden because you have d dt of rho.
How can we say p is constant?
No, p is not constant. P is a function of t.
Rho is
Rho is also a function of t. But when you expand it out, you have at most one derivative of rho, right? Okay, this is also one derivative of a. So this equation involves only terms with one derivative. Is that clear? That as a differential equation, that means that when you try to solve this, you have less number of constants to supply. Now it may look strange, right? And also it may look like some magic manipulation that I got rid of this term, the second derivative term. But this actually has a very simple interpretation. This equation, I'll leave it as an x check, that this is nothing but this, a consequence of d mu t nu mu equal to 0. Okay, then if you calculate from this metric the covariant derivative operator and calculate this, this leads to this. And you know that this is a consequence of Einstein's equation.
yeah.
Right? Why? Because Einstein's equation, let me go back. Little. Einstein's equation tells us r mu nu minus half r g mu nu as minus 8 pi g d mu nu, right? So if you take d mu on both sides, d mu of r mu nu minus half r g mu nu okay, that's taking the covariant derivative of Einstein's equation. And now the point is that this is identically 0. Okay, this is one of Bianchi identities, consequence of Bianchi identity. So if this is identically 0, it better be that this is also 0. And that is the energy momentum conservation equation. Okay. So essentially what we have done here by taking this derivative is explicitly doing this operation. Okay, we only took time derivative because even though you have d mu, okay, things really depend on your time coordinate. Okay, well, in a hidden way. Okay, because of course part of the metric, because of the k, part of the metric does depend on space, but we could avoid it by this trick, and we arrived at this equation over here. So let me repeat again. So the idea is that we are going to use this equation, which is called the energy momentum conservation equation, and the Friedmann equation as our independent equations. This equation is entirely equivalent to the other Einstein's equation, right? Because we could, I mean, after all, demanding this is the same as demanding this being equal to minus 8 pi g. Okay? We are just replacing this by this equation so that we have a first order differential equation. So the idea now is that we will treat a of t and say rho of t as our independent variables, okay, and substitute for p of t, okay, substitute p of t as a function of rho using the equation of state. Okay, because equation of state relates p and rho.
So equation of state means the equation of motions for the inner.
No, equation of state is some relationship between P and rho that you derive from knowing the nature of the source. Okay. But once you have derived it, you can forget about the source. That's the idea. Okay. So equation of that's the meaning of equation of state. Okay. That it essentially allows you to bypass a more complicated problem. Okay. And treat it in terms of the simple problem. That the real thing to do would have been to write down the full source terms, right? And then solve the complicated equation, the combined equation of gravity and resources, right? Either x mu or Maxwell field. Okay. What the equation of motion does is that it basically captures some property of the source into a relationship between rho and p. Okay. And then you can just use that to go ahead and solve the Einstein's equations without knowing the details of what the source is doing. Right? For example, if you know if the source was electromagnetic field, okay, the full set of Einstein's equations, dynamical equations, will involve solving the equation for the Maxwell field and metric simultaneously. Okay. But what equation of state will do is it will use the fact that the source is Maxwell field to find the relationship between P and rho. Okay. And then you substitute that. You forget about the Maxwell field, don't care about what it's doing. Okay. You only look at how P and rho and the metric is evolving.
Isotropic and anisotropic systems, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So, is it like if you have electromagnetic field or matter field, there will be, if you start from isotropic, it will remain isotropic?
Yeah, typically symmetry property of whenever there is a symmetry, right, it is preserved, right? Unless there is an instability. Okay. As long as there is no instability, if you start with a symmetric system, if the equations are symmetric and if the initial conditions are symmetric, right, there is nothing which can destroy the symmetry. Right? Sometimes it may happen that even if the initial condition is symmetric, a small perturbation could drive the system away from that symmetric configuration. Right? Imagine that you have a particle sitting on the top of a potential. Right? It's perfectly rotationally symmetric, right? So that seems to be a stable point. But any small fluctuation will drive the particle away from the tip. Right? So if these kinds of instabilities are there, then an isotropic system could evolve into an isotropic system. Okay. But we will assume that that doesn't happen, right? The isotropic system remains isotropic, and so we then capture the effect of the source into the average properties of the energy of this P and rho, and substitute and proceed with that.
So we see it from here that since T mu will have some isometry,
Yes.
the isometric transformation will mix up the different components of T mu, but
Yes.
still it has to preserve its functional form.
Yes.
So rho and P should have some relation between themselves.
No, isometry by itself will not tell us that rho and P will have a relation. Because isometry, this is the most general T mu which is isometric. Right? So any rho and P will have this property that it will preserve the isometry. Okay? Because isometries that we discussed do not mix up P and X, right? Homogeneity and isotropy, the transformations that we discussed, that takes T to T, right? And then mixes that acts on the space coordinates. Okay? That's why the isometry by itself will not tell us any relationship between rho and P. Okay? Otherwise, it would have told us some relation about the G naught naught and Gij, right? It doesn't, because A of T is a completely arbitrary function. Right? It's the same spirit that it will not tell us anything about the relationship between rho and P. Okay? That really requires information from sources.
The fact that rho and P will have some relationship between them.
Yes.
Like the way you derived the T mu form, there was nothing mention of any relation between
Rho and P, exactly.
It was
Right?
only a form that will have that.
Exactly. So the fact that rho and P have some relation, that is a consequence of using some particular kind of source. Okay. Okay. So let me just give an example. Okay. Suppose you have non-relativistic matter, just ordinary matter moving around. Okay. Stars, for example, just moving around in space, producing this energy momentum tensor. Okay. You can think of as particles, right? Because over this cosmic scale, the sources are all particles. Okay. And for that, you have calculated the energy momentum tensor. Right? Now let's see if we remember it. It's something like v tau delta 4 x minus x of tau.
dx.
I think I have a 1 over square root of minus determinant g and dx mu d tau dx mu d tau, right?
Determinant is tau, is integration of tau.
Integration of tau, yeah.
D4x. There is D4x, then there should be.
No, not d4x. See, the point is that we want to study this as a function of x, right? We are calculating t mu of x. So there will be no integration over x. I said. If you want to integrate t mu, then there will be d4x.
No,
So-
I'm not saying D4x, I'm saying that determinant
So that will be due to the
common
delta
D4x is there.
Yeah, I think this day. See, this by itself is not invariant and coordinate transformation, right?
Yes, yes.
You have to put a determinant g to make it into an invariant combination, right? So if you look at the expression, well, I think it was in the denominator.
Yes, yes.
Right? This was necessary to make this into a invariant and general coordinate transformation.
In the flat space case, it is this.
Yeah, flat space case of course is the correct form. Okay. But now, let's see, we are talking about source as the back of this, as the collection of particles like this, right? Okay. But because the universe is homogeneous and isotropic, okay, we know that this particle distribution on the average should look the same. Okay. In particular, okay, if there are particles moving in one direction, there will also be particles moving in the other direction, right? On the average, there should be no average velocity should be 0. Okay, in this cosmic frame. But none of this information actually is necessary for what we are going to say, because we will be considering non-relativistic matter, which means particles we will assume are moving very slowly. Okay, slow compared to the velocity of light. So in that case, dxi d tau is small. Right? Dxi d tau is velocity v over c. Right? That's small. So the only component that is dominant for non-relativistic is when mu and nu are both 0. Is this clear? So what does this mean for Tij? It tells us that Tij is 0. So is Ti 0. Okay. The only non-zero component is T naught naught. Okay. So this has then a very simple equation of state, which is P equal to 0. And we only T naught naught is non-zero, everything else is 0. Okay. So when you take into account the evolution of the universe, okay, and you want to take into account the sources, okay, correspond to normal distribution of galaxies and stars, this is the equation of state we use. Okay, because the normal matter, okay, in the form of galaxies and stars and superclusters of galaxies, etc., they are all moving very slowly, measured in units of velocity of light. Right? So slow velocity is always measured with respect to velocity of light, because this is in the c equal to 1 unit. Is this clear? So these will form one of the important components of the energy momentum tensor. Another component, which as you will see is not important today, okay, but it was important in the past, is electromagnetic waves. Okay. As I said, we know that we know today the universe has this cosmic microwave background, okay, which is filling it. Its energy density is very low because its temperature is some 2.73 degree Kelvin. Okay, so that has a very, very low energy density. Okay. Nevertheless, we can ask what is the equation of state for that system. Here, if you use the fact that P physically refers to the pressure, then you know what the equation of state is, right? What is the equation of state for electromagnetic wave? Rho by 3. P equal to rho by 3, right? So, electromagnetic wave, so in any radiation, has P equal to rho by 3.
So at that time the density was very high. Then also classical pressure would be there. Because
The point is the effect of quantum mechanics, right, takes
Very early.
comes into effect very early, right? And that time they make small quantum corrections, but this is still a dominant equation of state, right? And this in fact you can also derive in quantum theory what the equation of state is.
Sir, in T mu nu x there should be a summation over n or
Yes, summation over n, exactly. So basically because of the summation over n, okay, but for each of these it has this form. Okay. In fact, one of the role of summation over n is that the dxi theta gets averaged out to 0, because there are particles moving in this direction, particles moving in that direction, right? Here you didn't need to use it because the dxi theta is small anyway. Okay. But even if it is not small, okay, in an isotropic system, it will move in both directions, okay, and it will average out to 0.
So this row is the electromagnetic radiation density or total?
This is electromagnetic radiation density, not total, because you have to individually in each component you have to calculate the this separately, okay? Because the equation of state depends on the nature of the source.
Yeah.
Then what do you think will happen if this was relativistic matter? Particles are moving very fast, but in all possible directions. What will you get for the pressure? dxi d tau, dxj d tau. That's your current calculation, right? Averaging. Okay.
1 over 3 factor will come.
Yes, so 1 over 3 factor will come, right? Because essentially, its dxi d tau is magnitude is almost 1,
Yeah.
right? Because it's moving with velocity of light, right? Relativistic matter. But you have an angular average. Okay? So that will give you a factor of 1/3. Okay, same 1/3 that will have here. Okay, because after radiation also you can think as particles.
Yeah.
Okay, the radiation energy momentum tensor you can calculate in two different ways, right? One is think of this electromagnetic wave. You have calculated the T mu nu for electromagnetic wave, right? So suppose you didn't know anything about this P being pressure, okay, and you want to calculate this equation of state for electromagnetic wave. You take the expression for T mu nu given in terms of electromagnetic wave. Yeah, the electromagnetic fields, right? It has various components EI, EJ and so on. Then you use the fact that you are not talking about the energy momentum tensor for one single electromagnetic wave. It's moving in all possible directions. Okay. So if you calculate things, if you encounter things like EI, EJ, okay, they will average out to something proportional to delta EJ. Okay. EI, EJ. Okay. EI can be for one wave it's in one direction, for the other wave it's in opposite direction, right? So EI, EJ will average to 0 if I is not equal to J, because EI and EJ will separately average. But if EI and EJ are, if I and J are the same, okay, then of course it will always be positive, right? Then the average is not 0. Okay, average will be 1/3. Okay. So that is the way you can calculate this ratio, this relationship for electromagnetic wave, even if you didn't know anything about thermodynamics. Okay, just take the expression for energy momentum tensor and average. Okay, but only thing you have to use is that you have to do an angular averaging. Is this clear? In any case, next time we will see that the P is indeed the pressure, as we are familiar with from everyday definition of pressure. And so you can then use the thermodynamic result for radiation to also come to the same conclusion. Okay. But there are many ways to arrive at the same conclusion. Okay. Thinking of electromagnetic waves as waves or particles or just from thermodynamics.
But for present day, then T is 0.
For present day, yes, for matter P is equal to 0. Right? For radiation P is very low.
So
Right.
you can neglect.
Yes, except that that's not the only kind of source of T mu nu that we have today, right? In fact, if these are the only sources, right, then from Einstein's equation you can show that the universe will be decelerating. Okay, that's the reason why people thought that it's a deceleration parameter. Okay. But now we know that there is a defined kind of source of energy momentum tensor, and that's what is causing the acceleration. Okay, this we'll discuss next time.
So any, apart from the cosmological constant, any known source of T mu
Yes.
will contribute to a decelerating universe?
Yes, basically any known source of conventional source of T mu nu, okay, contribute towards decelerating universe, right? The acceleration requires that the pressure should be negative, okay, which is not there in normal matter, but it's true for cosmological constant.
If radiation pressure is high, then also it will get decelerated.
No, see, radiation pressure will be high, but rho will also be high. Okay, so what matters is the equation of state. Okay, that determines the rate of acceleration or deceleration. But as long as the sign is positive, the relative sign between p and rho, okay, you can show that the universe always decelerates. Okay, acceleration requires the sign to be negative. In fact, not just negative; it has to be above a certain, below a certain negative number for the acceleration to happen. Okay, which you can easily calculate because after all you have the
Equation.
Friedman equation, right? So you can just have to just take a second derivative and calculate that constant q naught and see under what condition it can become negative.
Condition would be A double dot greater than 0 basically. That is what we are.
Well, it's not exactly a double dot because it's, let's see. Yeah, it's a double dot because we expanded AT over A naught, right? A of T naught, yeah. So the
Q naught.
A double dot,
Expression would imply
Yeah.
that A double dot is
exactly, A double dot is the positive, yeah. So I think I'll stop here and we'll continue tomorrow.